All right, welcome to the Explainer. We're diving into a proposed law in Illinois that honestly could completely change the look of your street. It's called the Build Act, and it's a really big attempt to tackle the housing crisis by basically rewriting the rulebook on what can be built and where.
And that question really gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? There's this new proposal on the table in Illinois, the Build Act, and its goal is to go after the affordable housing crisis by, well, completely rethinking local zoning and building rules from the ground up. So, what exactly is in this new blueprint? Let's dig into the details of the bill. It's officially called House Bill 5626, and really get a handle on its main goals. Okay, so at its core, the Build Act is a pretty big deal. It's actually part of Governor Pritzker's whole affordable housing initiative. And here's the key thing. It's designed to preempt, override some of the local rules that cities and counties have and instead create a statewide standard. They're kind of taking cues from similar laws we've seen in places like California and Oregon. Now, one thing that's super important to understand is that this proposal isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Nope. It actually sets up a two-track system. That means there's one set of rules for municipalities, cities and suburbs, and a totally different set for those unincorporated areas that are run by the counties. All right, let's start with that first track and really unpack what it could mean for municipalities. This is where we could see some of the most dramatic changes in how our cities and suburbs are actually built. So the real centerpiece of the plan for cities is this idea called middle housing. The whole thought process behind it is, a lot of neighborhoods are zoned only for single-family homes, and that can really drive up prices and limit people's options. So what this mandate would do is force towns to allow multi-unit buildings, think duplexes or fourplexes, on those very same lots. The goal? Create more types of housing at different price points. And the proposal gets really specific here. It's not just a vague idea. It sets up a sliding scale that's based on the size of the lot. So for a typical lot, say up to 5,000 square feet, towns would have to allow up to 4 homes on it. But on bigger lots, over 7,500 square feet, that number could jump all the way up to 8. I mean, you can just imagine how that could totally change the look and feel of a classic suburban block. And it doesn't stop with duplexes and fourplexes. The bill would also make municipalities permit something called accessory dwelling units. You probably know them as ADUs or granny flats. We're talking about a small apartment over a garage or maybe a little cottage in the backyard. Under this proposed law, towns could still reasonably regulate their size, but they couldn't just ban them completely. Okay, and what about construction delays? We all know how slow those can be. Well, the proposal has a plan for that too, and it's a big one. If a local government takes too long to approve permits, if they miss the deadline, a developer could actually hire their own approved third-party inspector to review the plans and keep the project moving. It's basically a bypass for that part of the local government's process. All right, so that's the story for cities and suburbs. But what about that second track? Let's switch gears and look at the direct changes the Build Act would have on county governments, the ones in charge of all that unincorporated land. For counties, it's a little different. The proposed changes aren't so much about zoning, what you can build. It's more about the building codes, how you can build it. The bill actually goes in and directly amends the Illinois County's code, and it's taking dead aim at building safety standards. And this is where things get really interesting, and maybe a little controversial. One of the most specific details in the whole bill is this. It would stop counties from requiring 2 separate stairways in new residential buildings up to 6 stories tall. Now, the argument from supporters is that with modern fire suppression, like sprinkler systems, that second stairway is just redundant and adds a ton to construction costs. So, what does this all boil down to? It means creating a new, single, statewide standard for fire safety in these kinds of buildings. It would, in effect, take away the power of individual counties to enforce their own, sometimes stricter, local building codes for this exact thing. Now, as you can probably guess, a proposal that plans to override local zoning and safety rules has definitely kicked up a lot of debate. And it all really centers on this one big idea: local control. So on one side of the argument, you've got housing advocates and developers. They're saying, look, this patchwork of different local rules makes it way too slow and way too expensive to build the housing we desperately need. But on the other side, you have groups like the Illinois State Association of Counties, that's ISACo, which represents all those local governments, and they are raising some pretty serious concerns. And when it comes to things like that stairway rule, ISACo's position is crystal clear. They argue that local officials, not the state, are the ones who are best equipped to decide on the right safety standards for the people and the buildings in their own communities. It really is that classic debate, right? Local knowledge versus a uniform statewide rule. Okay, so with all these potential changes on the table and the big debate that's swirling around them, let's kind of step back for a second. Let's summarize the key takeaways and really look at the bigger picture of what this bill is all about. So let's do a quick recap. The BUILD Act, if it passes as it's written right now, would do a few major things: mandate more housing density in cities, legalize those ADUs everywhere, create one single standard for some county building codes, and try to speed up the whole permit process. Bottom line, it would be a massive shift away from local control towards statewide standards. And that really leaves us with this final question, doesn't it? The BUILD Act basically puts two fundamental values head to head. On one side, you have the push for statewide efficiency to solve a housing crisis, and on the other, you have that long-held American principle of local authority. How this whole legislative debate shakes out, well, that's going to shape Illinois communities for a long, long time.